The fluorescent lights hummed above Seattle General's military wing at 0600, their sterile hum the only sound in the break room where Megan O'Brien sat alone, folding a flag. The fabric was worn. Soft from handling. The edges had yellowed over 6 months, but the creases were sharp as knife wounds. She smoothed each fold with the flat of her hand, a motion so practiced it required no thought. Her hands moved on their own, muscle memory from a different life, in different uniforms, in a place where flags meant something heavier than cloth and color. The break room smelled like stale coffee and desperation. Someone had left a mug on the counter from yesterday, brown rings crusted inside like evidence. Megan didn't touch it. She folded the flag in the precise military pattern, triangle by triangle, until it formed a compact wedge no larger than a paperback book. Her fingers were steady. Not trembling. Never trembling. Not in public. Not ever again. The compression scars on her knuckles, pale lines that cut across her skin like surgical incisions, caught the fluorescent light as she worked. The scars told stories. Close quarters combat. Hand-to-hand with insurgents in a Helmand province compound. 9 years ago. A lifetime ago. She tucked the flag into her locker, behind the spare scrubs, pressed it into the dark corner where nobody would see it. Where nobody would ask questions. The military wing of Seattle General stretched east from the main hospital corridor, its 12 beds reserved for wounded service members, many of them fresh from overseas theaters. The hospital had a contract with the Department of Defense, a quiet arrangement. The kind of arrangement that brought naval intelligence calling 6 months ago with an offer that wasn't quite an offer. Captain O'Brien, they'd said, using her rank like a key. We need someone in the military wing. Someone who understands the culture. Someone who can identify security leaks before they happen. Someone who can disappear. She'd taken the nursing position under her civilian name. Megan O'Brien, RN. The credentials were real. The nursing degree was real. 23 years ago, she'd earned it at Bethesda Naval Hospital before she'd become something else, something with a rank and a unit designation and a call sign that people whispered when they thought about the kind of warrior who moved through danger zones like water finding the lowest point. Viper. That's what they'd called her in SEAL Team 3. Not to her face. Never to her face. But she'd heard it in the hangar, seen it written on briefing boards, watched it change the way people breathed around her when they knew what she'd done in Fallujah. What she'd survived. What she'd carried out of burning buildings while rounds punched through the walls around her. Now she pushed a cart through the ICU hallway at 0630, her head down, her movements invisible. Resident physicians brushed past without acknowledgement. The nursing students avoided her eye. By design. By necessity. A quiet nurse was a forgotten nurse. A forgotten nurse was a nurse who could watch. Listen. Notice when visitors asked about classified operations. When patients mentioned security protocols that shouldn't be mentioned. When someone tried to photograph classified equipment or ask questions that didn't add up. This was the job. The real job. The nursing was just the cover story. She pulled up the chart for the new admission in Bay 4. Commander Hayes, Navy SEAL, admitted at 2,200 hours yesterday. 5 bullet wounds sustained in Tikrit. Entry wounds clustered on his right side, a pattern that suggested small arms fire from close range, maybe 30 meters. The bullets had missed the heart by millimeters. Barely missed the subclavian artery. Dr. Marcus Mercer had stabilized him in surgery, closing the wounds, placing a chest tube to prevent fluid accumulation around the lungs. The commander was critical but stable. His oxygen saturation was 94%. His heart rate was running hot at 118 beats per minute, but that was expected. The body was healing. Fighting back. At the nursing station, Jennifer from night shift handed over the evening chart. Commander stable, she said, stifling a yawn. Vitals every 2 hours. Dr. Mercer wants him on strict fluid restriction. Says he's paranoid about pulmonary edema. Megan nodded, listening to the words underneath the words. Paranoid. That meant Mercer had already made decisions without consulting anyone else. That meant the commander's care was being shaped by one man's preferences, not by the patient's actual physiology. "One more thing," Jennifer said, her voice dropping. "The patient mentioned a name yesterday. During rounds. He asked if we had an O'Brien on staff. Said something about pulling an O'Brien out of a burning Humvee in Fallujah." Jennifer's eyes flicked up, searching Megan's face. "Do you know him?" The moment stretched. 2 seconds. 3. Megan's jaw tightened imperceptibly, the only outward sign that something had shifted inside her chest, something that felt like pressure building behind a dam. "Lot of O'Briens in the military," Megan said quietly. She turned back to the chart. Her voice remained flat, deferential. A good nurse's voice. A forgettable voice. "I'll keep an eye on his chest tube placement. Mercer's protocol can be adjusted if the fluid output doesn't match his expectations." Jennifer nodded and left. The fluorescent lights hummed. Somewhere down the hallway, a ventilator wheezed its mechanical rhythm, pushing air into lungs that couldn't breathe on their own. Megan walked to Bay 4. The commander lay on his back, white sheets pulled up to his armpits, his chest rising and falling with mechanical precision. The oxygen tubing ran beneath his nose. The cardiac monitor traced his heartbeat across a small screen, green peaks and valleys, numbers displaying his blood pressure and oxygen saturation. His right side was bandaged. The chest tube emerged from his ribcage and ran down into a drainage canister that hung from the bed frame, collecting fluid. The canister was nearly clear. Good drainage. Healthy drainage. The lungs were responding. But his eyes were open. Alert. Fixed on the hallway door as if he'd been waiting. "Commander," Megan said quietly. Not approaching the bed. Maintaining distance. Professional. "Has your pain level?" "Acceptable," he said. His voice was rough, damaged by the breathing tube they'd had in his throat during surgery. "You're not the night nurse. Day shift starts at 0700. I'm helping with the transition." She was checking the chest tube placement, verifying the bandages were dry, reviewing the drainage characteristics. All standard tasks. All observable tasks. Nothing that would raise questions. "Any difficulty breathing?" "No." He paused. "You checked on me 3 times last night. Adjusted something with the drain around midnight." She didn't respond immediately. She was reviewing the monitor, seeing what the machine was showing. His oxygen saturation was 94%. It should be higher. Should be at least 96, maybe 97. The chest tube was draining properly, but something in his presentation suggested the lungs weren't fully re-expanding. The fluid pocket might be smaller than Dr. Mercer's imaging had suggested, or the lung tissue might be more damaged than the initial assessment indicated. "Your oxygen levels are slightly lower than optimal," Megan said carefully. "I noticed last night that your chest tube positioning might be contributing to incomplete lung re-expansion. Made a small adjustment to the tube angle and the drainage canister height. That's within standard nursing protocols." The commander's eyes tracked her face. "Looking for something. Recognition, maybe. Confirmation. What's your name?" "Megan O'Brien." Something flickered across his expression. "Recognition, definitely. Call sign Viper." She didn't respond. The hallway was empty, but sound carried. Walls had ears in hospitals. Walls had cameras. Walls had people trained to listen for things that didn't add up. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For last night. And for Fallujah. Your son." "I'll check on your pain medication in an hour," Megan said, her voice perfectly level. She was already moving toward the door. "The day nursing staff will take over at 0700. Dr. Mercer will be in for rounds at 0730. Try to rest." She left the room before he could say anything else. At the nursing station, she reviewed the medication log. Dr. Mercer had prescribed morphine for pain management, which was standard. But he'd also ordered a diuretic, a medication designed to flush fluid from the body. Combined with his strict fluid restriction protocol, it created a specific medical environment. Less fluid in the system meant lower preload on the heart, which meant lower blood pressure, which meant the lungs would receive less pressure to re-expand against the collapsed tissue. It was a subtle choice. Not obviously wrong. But it was a choice that prioritized the heart's workload over the lungs' healing. Different doctors made different calls. The problem was that the commander's presentation, the slightly low oxygen saturation, the pattern of his injuries, the way he was breathing, suggested his lungs needed aggressive re-expansion more than his heart needed pressure relief. Megan made a note in the chart. Standard observations. Completely routine documentation. Nothing that would draw attention. But she would watch the trend. If his oxygen saturation dropped further, she would mention it. Carefully. Deferentially. A good nurse's observation. At 0720, Dr. Marcus Mercer arrived for morning rounds. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with the kind of posture that came from knowing he'd never lost an argument in his entire professional life. His white coat was immaculate. His stethoscope hung around his neck like a symbol of authority. He was already talking as he approached the nursing station, addressing a medical student who looked terrified. The standard protocol for traumatic pneumothorax involves careful monitoring of pleural fluid accumulation, he was saying. Most nurses don't understand the nuance. They see a chest tube and assume it's just mechanical drainage. It's not. It's a carefully calibrated intervention that requires physician oversight. The medical student nodded frantically. Mercer didn't acknowledge Megan's presence. He didn't look at her. He picked up the commander's chart and scanned it with the speed of someone who'd already made all his decisions and was just confirming what he already knew. "Let's check on our SEAL," he said to the student. They walked toward Bay 4. Megan stood at the nursing station, watching the hallway. Listening to the ventilators wheeze. Feeling the weight of the flag still in her locker, still folded into the dark corner where nobody would find it. The next words from that room would matter. They would shape what happened next. They would determine whether the commander's lungs got what they needed or whether Dr. Mercer's protocol would take precedence over his actual physiology. She waited. The fluorescent lights hummed. Somewhere in the building, a siren wailed, incoming ambulance, new trauma, new emergencies stacking up like cordwood, waiting for people who knew how to help. And that's when Mercer's voice boomed from Bay 4, loud enough for the entire nursing station to hear. But that wasn't the worst part. Dr. Mercer's voice boomed from Bay 4, loud enough for the entire nursing station to hear. But that wasn't the worst part. "Nurse O'Brien." Not a request. A summons. His tone carried the particular cruelty of a man who enjoyed an audience, and he'd positioned himself in the ICU hallway outside Commander Hayes's room where every nurse, every aide, every respiratory therapist within 30 feet would turn their heads. Megan was checking the med cart, restocking saline flushes with the methodical precision that had kept her alive through 3 tours with SEAL Team 3. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. She could already see the script playing out, the small crowd gathering, the charge nurse finding sudden interest in the whiteboard, the fresh residents learning how institutional power actually worked. Your chart notes describe interventions beyond your scope. Mercer stepped closer, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the tile floor like a metronome counting down to something. His tie was silk, probably cost more than Megan made in a week as a civilian nurse, and it caught the fluorescent light like a weapon. You adjusted vasopressor rates without consulting attending staff. You repositioned his chest tube drainage. You initiated a second full line without orders. You think 6 months here makes you a physician? Megan turned slowly. She met his gaze with the kind of stillness that comes from having already survived worse. Much worse. Sand in her boots. Smoke in her lungs. The weight of a teammate going limp in her arms. Her face was flat, composed, the opposite of the red-faced anger Mercer clearly expected. That absence of emotion seemed to infuriate him more than any argument could have. "Your ego isn't a vital sign, doctor," she said quietly, her voice steady as a surgical laser, "but your patients still code when you prioritize it." The silence was absolute. Someone dropped a clipboard. It clattered against the tile like an exclamation point on the sentence she'd just delivered. Mercer's jaw tightened. His hands clenched. She watched the color rise in his neck, creeping toward his face like a thermometer in boiling water. She'd seen that look before, not in hospitals, but in dark buildings where men with more pride than sense realized they'd underestimated someone. She turned without waiting for his response and walked away, her movements measured and unhurried. Not fleeing. Never fleeing. Simply leaving, the way someone walks away from a conversation that's already over. Behind her, she heard him start to speak. Stop. Start again. Then nothing. Just his breathing, audible now in a way that made clear the entire floor had heard what she'd said. In her peripheral vision, she caught the charge nurse's expression, shock mixed with something that might have been respect, or might have been the understanding that Megan had just volunteered to be a target. By lunchtime, the retaliation had begun. She entered the break room at 1,215 hours with her tray, salad, coffee black, a granola bar she'd grabbed from the vending machine, and saw 4 nurses at the center table. They were mid-conversation, relaxed, the casual camaraderie of people who work together in the trenches. Rachel, the night shift charge nurse who'd nodded at Megan twice. Chen, who'd asked about her weekend. Morrison, the older RN with 30 years on the unit. They saw her. Their eyes met hers for exactly 1 second. Then, in a coordinated movement that could have been choreographed, they stood. Rachel gathered her plate. Chen closed her notebook. Morrison pushed her chair in. They left without speaking, without eye contact after that initial moment, a rejection so deliberate it was almost graceful. Megan set her tray on the table, the one they'd abandoned, and sat down. The fluorescent light hummed above her head. Somewhere in the kitchen area, a refrigerator compressor cycled on, the sound like a held breath being released. She opened her salad container and ate mechanically, tasting nothing, aware that she was still being observed. 2 residents lingered by the coffee maker, whispering. One glanced at her. Not with sympathy. With the kind of careful distance people maintain from someone contagious. She finished eating, rinsed her container, and left. By that afternoon, the break room rejection had been superseded by something more formal. A memo appeared on the unit board, printed on hospital letterhead, dated that morning. Performance note, nursing staff, O'Brien, M. Date, current. Issue, insubordination and practicing beyond scope of practice. Scope violation includes chart documentation of independent clinical decisions without attending physician approval. Recommendation, immediate review of all charting for compliance with hospital protocols. Signed, Mercer, M.D., attending physician, ICU. Megan read it once while standing at the station. Didn't remove it. Didn't call the union. Didn't argue with the charge nurse, who was carefully not making eye contact. She simply noted the formal escalation and moved on to her remaining tasks. This was how Mercer worked, not just loudly, but strategically. One humiliation was a moment. A written memo was institutional. It would follow her. It would be documentation. The first brick in a carefully constructed wall. By 1600 hours, she was supposed to check Commander Hayes's chest tube, part of the standard monitoring protocol that had nothing to do with scope violations. She'd done this procedure 100 times in the field, had trained nurses to do it while under fire. But when she approached Bay 4, she found Mercer already there, and he wasn't alone. The commander's wife sat in the visitor's chair, her face pale but composed. Military wife. She knew how to hold herself. Their daughter, maybe 16, stood near the window, watching her father's chest rise and fall with the ventilator's rhythm. The commander himself was unconscious, sedated, his body swollen from 5 days of poor fluids and trauma response. Megan had been authorized to check his drainage output every 4 hours. Standard protocol. Mercer saw her in the doorway and his expression shifted into something calculated. Like a predator recognizing dinner had arrived. He rose to his full height. He was tall, probably 6'2", and he used that height like a weapon and moved to intercept her before she could approach the bedside. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, his voice suddenly warm, suddenly concerned, suddenly everything it hadn't been in the hallway that morning, "I need to ask Nurse O'Brien to leave. There have been serious questions about her competence and her credentials. I can't allow unauthorized personnel near your husband." Hospital policy. There was no hospital policy. Megan recognized the lie immediately. What she also recognized was the masterful deployment of a mother's fear. Mrs. Hayes's eyes widened. Her hand moved to her daughter's shoulder, pulling her slightly closer. Megan looked at Commander Hayes, the man who'd run into burning diesel and black smoke in Fallujah to pull out a lance corporal pinned under a burning Humvee. The man who'd saved her son. His eyes were closed. The ventilator hissed its mechanical breath for him, the sound like wind through a canyon. His wedding ring caught the fluorescent light. His daughter's hand trembled slightly on the rail. Megan turned to leave without a word. But Mercer wasn't finished. "I know you came highly recommended," he said to Mrs. Hayes, his voice pitched for maximum reassurance, "but sometimes people exaggerate their credentials. We're looking into some discrepancies with her nursing license right now. Better safe than sorry with your husband's care." In the hallway, Megan heard it. Had to have been intentional, she was close enough. A senior nurse, maybe 5 feet away, leaning toward an aide. "I heard she forged her nursing license. That's why Mercer's investigating her." The aide's eyes widened. Megan kept walking, her boots not quite soundless on the tile, each step exactly like the ones before it. No deviation. No trembling. No stopping to defend herself, because defending herself meant explaining who she actually was, and that explanation wasn't hers to give. She moved through the hallway toward the medication room, her jaw set, her breathing steady. Pain was information. Humiliation was information. And the information she had now was that Mercer understood only one language: institutional power. He didn't care about the truth. He cared about narrative. About who controlled the story. About silencing anyone who threatened his authority. By evening, the isolation had deepened. At shift change, the incoming night nurse barely nodded at her. The phlebotomist who needed to draw labs on Commander Hayes pointedly asked the charge nurse if Megan was cleared to assist, her tone making clear she expected the answer to be no. In the medication room, 2 techs fell silent when she entered, then resumed their conversation only after she left. She sat in her car in the hospital parking garage at 2,100 hours, the engine running, the heater pushing warm air across her hands. On the passenger seat lay a folded flag, colors of the United States, precise triangular folds, the kind folded over a casket. It had belonged to a private named Kessler, part of her son's unit. 23 years old. Died of an IED in a marketplace no one could pronounce. She'd been there. She'd helped carry him. She kept the flag in her car like a prayer, like a promise, like evidence. From the parking garage, she could see the ICU windows on the 4th floor. The lights were on. She could see shadows moving. One of them was probably Mercer, sitting in his office, making phone calls, laying groundwork, building the case that would destroy her before anyone realized she was worth keeping. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that she couldn't defend herself, couldn't reveal the truth, couldn't call naval intelligence and ask them to confirm her actual credentials, because doing so would blow her cover. And someone had to be here. Someone had to watch. Someone had to remember that Commander Hayes had earned the right to live. She pulled the flag closer and waited. The commander's room at 0347 was a symphony of failure. Alarms shrieked in cascading waves, the monitor screaming red, the ventilator gasping, the 4-pump wailing its distress call. Megan heard it from the break room where she wasn't supposed to be, where she'd been sitting for 3 hours in scrubs that no longer belonged to her, watching the unit through the glass partition and refusing to leave. The sound of code blew without the words. The sound of someone dying. She moved. Not ran. Moved. The kind of precise, economical motion that came from muscle memory deeper than conscious thought. 17 years as a Navy combat medic in Helmand Province, in forward operating bases where the difference between hesitation and reflex meant whether a man got on the helicopter alive. Her boots hit the tile in a rhythm that had saved lives on 3 continents. The corridor blurred past her. The resident stood in the doorway of the commander's room like a stone. Tall kid, maybe 26, eyes locked on the monitor with the glazed expression of someone watching a car crash and discovering he was driving it. His mouth moved but nothing came out. Megan could read vitals like other people read faces. Oxygen saturation, 82% and dropping. Trachea deviated to the left. The chest tube, the plastic line that should have been draining air and fluid from around the commander's lung, was kinked, clotted, dead. Tension pneumothorax. The collapsed lung was pushing his heart against his ribs, suffocating him from the inside. Move. Her voice came out like the low rumble of a diesel engine idling. The resident flinched and stepped aside. The commander's skin had taken on the bluish pallor of a man whose blood wasn't carrying oxygen anymore. His fingers were curled against the sheets, his chest heaving in the jerky, desperate rhythm of a drowning man above water. Megan's hands were already moving. O2 sat 78%. 74%. The monitor beeping in syncopated panic. She grabbed the crash cart in one motion, muscle memory drawing her directly to the needle compartment. 14-gauge angiocath. The same needle she'd used on a Marine at Forward Operating Base Shank in 2009, and a SEAL at Combat Outpost Sulawesi in 2011, and a Delta operator in a bunker in Jalabad whose name was still classified. Second intercostal space, midclavicular line. She didn't think about the hospital policy. She didn't think about Dr. Mercer's restrictions. She thought about the fact that this man had dragged her son out of a burning Humvee in Fallujah when the temperature was hot enough to cook the paint off the metal. The resident was stammering something. "You're not allowed to. You're suspended. Dr. Mercer said you can't." Megan didn't hear him. There was only the sound of her own breathing and the commander's labored gasps and the hiss that was coming. She found the space between his ribs with her fingertips, the landmark as familiar as her own name. Inserted the needle. Felt the subtle give of the pleura. The hiss of air escaping, that thin, urgent whisper of pressure releasing, like opening a valve on a tire at the edge of a cliff. Oxygen saturation climbed. 81%. 86%. 92%. The commander's body went rigid for 1 second, then relaxed into the mattress like a man surfacing from drowning. His eyes opened. Found hers. The blue of a winter sky over the Hindu Kush. "Easy," Megan said. Just one word. Barely a whisper. "I've got you, sir." The resident had gone pale. "I'm calling the charge nurse." "This is, you can't." Megan straightened up, the 14-gauge needle now functioning as a temporary decompression valve, buying time for an actual chest tube placement. The commander's oxygen saturation steadied at 94%. His heart rate began its descent from the triple digits. His eyes never left her face. Dr. Mercer came through the doors at 0353, summoned by the code, his white coat flapping like he was flying. His eyes went wide for exactly half a second when he saw the needle catheter in place, the commander breathing, the saturation climbing on the monitor. Then his face went white. Then it went red. "What did you do?" His voice came out strangled, a man watching his professional mythology collapse in real time. Megan stepped back from the bedside. Her hands were steady. Her voice was steady. Tension pneumothorax. Chest tube clotted. "I performed needle decompression at the second intercostal space, midclavicular line." He was desaturating to 74%. He needed airway restoration or he was going to code. "You performed a procedure without authorization. You're not a physician. You don't have the training to." Dr. Mercer's voice was rising, echoing in the small room like a man shouting into a canyon. You just violated approximately 40 hospital protocols. You performed an invasive procedure. You contaminated a sterile field. You. The commander's hand moved. It was weak, the kind of movement that cost him everything he had left, but it was deliberate. It grabbed Megan's wrist and held it. His eyes were on Mercer now, and they were cold as ice water. She just saved my life, the commander said. His voice was hoarse from the ventilator, barely more than a rasp, but there was authority in it that no amount of crying could manufacture. Stand. Down. Dr. Mercer's jaw clenched. He looked at the monitor. Looked at the commander. Looked at the needle catheter and the climbing O2 saturation like they were both personal betrayals. His voice came out lower, but no less vicious. Document everything, he said to the resident. Every word she said. Every medication she touched. Every procedure she performed. Everything. He turned on his heel and walked out, his white coat snapping behind him like a flag. The resident stood there, notebook trembling slightly in his hands, and Megan could read the calculation happening behind his eyes. Loyalty to Dr. Mercer, or the truth about what had just happened. The fear won. It always did. By 0600, Dr. Mercer had made the first call. He was in his office, the one with the mahogany desk and the 3 degrees on the wall, and the door was closed, but his voice carried through the hospital like contamination spreading. Megan didn't hear it directly. She was pulling a regular shift in the ICU, working the other half of her unit, checking on 3 other patients with the kind of mechanical precision that came from her hands, knowing exactly what to do while her mind was somewhere else, but the charge nurse told her within an hour. He called the credentialing committee, Sarah said quietly, finding Megan in the medication room. Said he's got serious concerns about your file. Asked them to open a formal investigation into whether your nursing degree is legitimate. Megan didn't stop counting out her 0800 medications. 60 milliliters normal saline. Morphine sulfate, 2 milligrams. The measurements didn't change because the truth of her identity had just been weaponized. They remained exactly what they were. The numbers stayed steady. There's more, Sarah said. She was a good nurse, 23 years at Seattle General, 2 kids in college, the kind of woman who didn't enjoy delivering bad news but did it anyway because people deserved to know what was coming. He's calling board members. I heard him on the phone in the hallway outside his office. He said something about you performing unauthorized procedures. Said you might be a liability. By 1200, 3 separate calls had been made. The charge nurse relayed the messages to Megan without meeting her eyes, the way people do when they're delivering news that doesn't feel quite real yet, but probably will. Board member number 1, Dr. Mercer expressed serious concerns about a staff member's credentialing. Asked that we review her employment history and references. Says there may be falsified documents in her file. Board member number 2 received a call regarding unauthorized medical procedures and practicing beyond scope of licensure. Asked to expedite a credentialing review. Board member number 3, Dr. Mercer intimated that one of the ICU nurses may be operating under false credentials. Suggested that this could constitute a liability issue for the hospital. Megan heard about all of it from different sources, none of them direct, all of them careful. The hospital worked on information the way a body works on infection, spreading it, containing it, tracking it. By early afternoon, the credentialing office had opened a file. By 1400 hours, someone had placed a call to the state nursing board. Her phone, the classified Pentagon line hidden in the pocket of her scrubs, the one that rang in a way that made ordinary phones sound like toys, didn't ring. There was a protocol for this. There was always a protocol. But the protocol assumed she could reach out first. The protocol assumed she could make a move before the walls closed completely in. She couldn't. Not without revealing the assignment. The rain started at 1600, heavy and grey and furious, drumming against the hospital windows like it was angry at the glass for existing. Megan stood at the medication cart during a lull between patient checks and watched it come down in sheets. Somewhere on this unit, Dr. Mercer was making additional calls. Somewhere in an office 2 floors up, someone was pulling her original application, cross-referencing her previous employers, beginning the systematic dismantling of a civilian cover that had taken naval intelligence 6 months to construct. The folded flag was in her locker. The one she'd kept from her son's memorial service, the one that had traveled with her through 2 subsequent tours, the one she'd placed on the commander's windowsill as a private prayer to whatever gods watched over people who loved the wrong profession. It was still there. Physical proof of who she really was. Evidence that no amount of investigation could touch, because it existed only in the fact of her grief. She didn't know that the Pentagon was already moving. She didn't know that a phone call had come into naval intelligence operations, routed through 3 different secure channels, reporting that a captain embedded in Colorado Springs had gone dark on her communication schedule. She didn't know that her handler had already escalated to the director. She didn't know that wheels were turning in Washington, meetings being called, authorization being sought. All she knew was the rain on the windows and the fact that Dr. Mercer had decided to burn her entire identity rather than admit that a suspended nurse had saved a man's life that he had prescribed should die quietly. The shift ended at 1900 hours. Megan clocked out and walked to her locker. The scrubs came off and went into the bin for hospital laundry. The badge came off her neck and went into her pocket. The commander was stable. His oxygen saturation was holding at 96%. His heart rate was steady. Dr. Mercer had placed a new chest tube at 1,500 hours, the correct procedure, the one he should have done in the first place, and the old needle decompression had been replaced with proper equipment. She was walking toward the exit when her pager buzzed. Not her work pager. The one hidden in her personal phone. A single message in text, doors. Now. It could have meant anything. It should have meant she needed to run. Instead, it meant that someone very high up had made a very fast decision to bring her in from the cold. But she didn't know that yet. All she knew was rain and the lights of the hospital reflecting off the wet pavement and the fact that she'd saved a man's life by breaking every rule that mattered to people who'd never saved anything but their own careers. The alarms shriek at 0300 hours. 3 short blasts. Then continuous. The sound cuts through the hospital like a blade through silk, and Megan's eyes snap open. She's been sitting in the break room with lukewarm coffee and her badge already turned in, but her body doesn't ask permission anymore. Her body moves. The chest drain monitor shows the problem before she even reaches Commander Hayes's room. The waveform is flat. No oscillation. The drain has kinked, twisted on itself during his restless sleep, and now air is accumulating in his pleural space with nothing to stop it. Tension pneumothorax. The lung collapses. The heart shifts. In 7 minutes, his blood pressure becomes incompatible with life. She runs past the frozen resident, a kid who looks like he's never seen an actual emergency outside a simulation, and moves directly to the bedside. Mrs. Hayes is pressed against the far wall, terror locking her jaw. The machines are screaming. The monitor shows his oxygen saturation dropping like a stone in dark water, 82 to 76 to 71. His lips are already turning blue. Megan's hands move before her mind finishes the diagnosis. Second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. The needle goes in exactly where it needs to be. A 14-gauge angiocath, because she's practiced this on dummies that feel nothing and on living humans in combat zones where delays cost limbs. The hiss of air escaping. Not a gentle sound. Urgent. Demanding. Like steam from a pressure cooker finally given release. O2 sat climbs. 75. 82. 88. Stable. The commander gasps like a man pulled from water, his chest heaving, his eyes wide and terrified, and then, recognition. Not of where he is. Recognition of what she is. What she just did. The kind of recognition that only comes when someone's hands move with the precision of people who have done this before under enemy fire. The resident is finally moving now, fumbling for supplies, his face the color of old bandages. The nurses arrive, drawn by the alarms like sharks to blood in open water. One of them is Sarah, the charge nurse who'd stopped sitting at Megan's break table 3 days ago. Sarah stops. Sarah stares. Sarah sees exactly what just happened. Get him on his side, Megan says, her voice flat as pavement. Reposition the drain. I need a chest X-ray to confirm lung re-expansion. Nobody hesitates. Nobody questions. The commands in her voice aren't requests, they're the kind of authority that comes from having made life and death decisions when the alternative was letting people die. Sarah moves. The resident moves. Mrs. Hayes is crying now, her hand pressed to her chest. The X-ray tech arrives in 4 minutes. Lungs are clear. Perfect re-expansion. The commander's blood pressure stabilizes at 118/74. His oxygen is holding at 96%. He's going to live because a woman they all thought was just a quiet nurse just saved his life by doing something a junior resident should have been trained to handle but froze instead. But that wasn't the worst part. The administrator calls her at 08 for 7 hours. Not a conversation. A summons. Megan walks to the 4th floor with her badge already in her pocket, knowing exactly what's about to happen. The administrator's office smells like expensive coffee and institutional furniture. There's a file on his desk. Thick. Already printed. Dr. Mercer has presented evidence of credential irregularities, the administrator says. He won't meet her eyes. Men like this never do when they're about to betray someone they're afraid of. Inconsistencies in your nursing board records. Gaps in your employment history from 2016 to 2018. References that don't match standard verification protocols. He's found exactly what he was looking for because he knew exactly where to look. Dr. Mercer has connections. Men like Mercer always do. Someone at the state nursing board who owes him a favor. Someone in credentialing who takes his calls. The careful investigation of a man who knows how to weaponize bureaucracy. Megan sits down without being invited. She folds her hands in her lap, the same way she's folded them through 17 years of briefings, interrogations, and conversations where the wrong word would end careers, or lives. I can explain, she says. But she can't. Not without revealing that naval intelligence placed her at Seattle General under a civilian nursing license to monitor potential security breaches involving wounded special operations personnel. Not without explaining that her real credentials are locked in a Pentagon database behind 17 layers of classification. Not without burning every asset, every mission, every carefully constructed identity that's kept her useful to people who measure national security in blood and silence. The administrator slides the termination papers across his desk like a man playing chess with pieces he doesn't understand. Effective immediately. Your suspension is now formal termination. We'll need your badge and your access card. Security will escort you from the building. She hands over her badge. The blue plastic still warm from being in her pocket. The picture on it shows a woman in scrubs with her hair pulled back, her face neutral, her eyes empty. A woman who doesn't exist anymore. That evening, she's in the hospital laundry room in the basement folding her scrubs for the last time. The industrial washers are rumbling on their cycles, the air thick with the chemical smell of industrial detergent and bleach. Her hands smooth each crease with the same precision she used to pack surgical kits in combat zones, muscle memory that doesn't care that her career just ended. A laundry aide watches from the corner, an older woman with kind eyes who's worked here for 23 years and knows better than to speak. Megan folds the last pair of scrubs, sets them on the counter beside the clinical notes she'll leave behind, and walks toward the exit. She's supposed to disappear now. That's what extraction protocols say. Get out, establish a new cover, wait for reassignment. Her secure phone is already blinking with a message from her naval intelligence handler, extraction in 48 hours. Mission compromised. She should be packing. She should be deleting her trail. She should be doing exactly what 17 years of training has taught her to do. Instead, she drives back to Seattle General. It takes everything in her to walk back through those doors, to move past the security desk where they already know she's been terminated, to use Mrs. Hayes's visitor clearance, a gift the commander's wife had thrust into her hand the previous morning, to slip back into the wing where they're keeping him. The staff, seeing her suspension, try to stop her. Protocol. Rules. Liability. But Mrs. Hayes is there in the corridor, and she moves between Megan and the objections like a mother bear protecting territory. She saved my husband, Mrs. Hayes says, and her voice is the kind that stops arguments cold. Let her say goodbye. Megan sits beside the commander's bed at 2,247 hours. The folded flag is in her lap. Not his flag. The flag from her son's fallen teammate. Marcus Williams. Killed in action outside Fallujah when a roadside bomb took a Humvee and 4 good men with it. Commander Hayes had carried Marcus's body out. That's the kind of man he is. That's the kind of man who remembers other people's dead. The commander's eyes are open now, conscious, weak but aware. He focuses on her face with the intensity of someone trying to read a message written in a language he almost understands. You were Navy, he whispers. I am Navy, she says. Tikrit. Different war, she says. Different years. Same mission. Keep people alive. He nods. His eyes close. His hand finds hers across the gap between the bed and the chair, and they sit like that in the fluorescent silence, 2 soldiers who've seen things that never leave you, holding the weight of loss in a folded piece of cloth. Thank you, he whispers. Sleep, Commander, she says. He does. She stays until the night shift changes at 0600 hours, and then she leaves before anyone can ask questions. The sunrise comes cold and gray through the Colorado Springs streets, and she drives through it with both hands on the wheel, knowing that by tomorrow morning, everything will change again. She has no idea what's already in motion. No idea that calls have been made through channels she doesn't even know exist. No idea that the man who called in those favors, the one who watched from a distance as a quiet nurse saved a SEAL commander with bullet wounds, the one who saw her hands move with the precision of people who have killed and healed in places that don't appear on maps, has decided that someone needs to know exactly who Captain Megan O'Brien is. The Pentagon has already decided the same thing. 2 Pentagon officers in dress uniforms arrived at Seattle General at 0630 on the 4th morning, their shoes clicking against tile with the precision of a metronome counting down to Judgment Day. They walked directly to Commander Hayes's room without stopping at the nursing station, without asking permission, with the kind of authority that made hospital staff step aside instinctively. Megan sat beside the commander's bed, her hands folded in her lap, holding the folded flag from her son's fallen teammate, a private moment before she disappeared, before she went silent forever, before this undercover assignment became just another sealed file in a vault somewhere at the Pentagon. The taller officer, a captain with silver dolphins pinned above his ribbons, stopped at the foot of the bed. He didn't ask permission. He began reading from a folder that seemed to glow under the fluorescent lights like a document pulled from another lifetime entirely. Captain Megan O'Brien, United States Navy, Navy Cross recipient for Valor under fire in Helmand Province, 3 tours as a combat medic with SEAL Team 3, combat citations in Kandahar and Farah Province, 847 lives documented as direct medical saves, no casualties under her command in 3 separate deployment cycles. The words landed like artillery fire, each one detonating in the silence of the room. The second officer unfolded a citation, and the paper seemed to fill the entire space between them with the weight of things unsaid for 6 months. Megan didn't move. Her face remained flat, composed, a surface so still it looked like carved stone. The commander's eyes widened, confusion and recognition colliding at the exact same moment, the way it happens when you suddenly understand that the person you've been looking at was never the person you thought you were seeing. Mrs. Hayes covered her mouth with both hands. The monitor beeped its steady rhythm, indifferent to revelation. And that's when Dr. Mercer burst through the door. He didn't knock. He never knocked. His white coat flapped around him like a cape that had lost its purpose, and his mouth opened with something between a shout and a plea. This is absurd. She's a nurse. I have documentation proving, but he stopped mid-sentence, his words dying the way oxygen dies in a vacuum. A Marine colonel entered behind him, moving through the doorway with the kind of presence that made the air pressure change, that made everything else in the room suddenly feel smaller. The colonel was not tall, but he moved like someone who had carried weight that bent mountains. He came to attention. His right hand rose to his forehead, fingers extended, and he saluted, not the casual gesture civilians imagine, but the full-body commitment of respect, the kind of salute given only to those who have earned it in places where salutes could get you killed. His eyes were locked on the small row of ribbons that Megan quietly unpinned from inside her jacket lining, the ones she had worn against her skin for 6 months, the ones no one had ever seen. Navy Cross first, the medal itself no bigger than a silver dollar but carrying the weight of every moment it took to earn it. 2 purple hearts. A bronze star with a Combat V device. Combat Medical Badge. 3 Joint Service Commendation Medals. The colonel's hand dropped. He turned to face Mercer, and when he spoke, his voice moved through the room like a blade through silk. You contacted a state investigator. You fed him falsified concerns. You accessed hospital databases. Mercer's face had gone the color of medical gauze, bloodless and translucent. You attempted to forge documentation to support your claims against an active-duty naval intelligence operative conducting classified medical surveillance. The colonel stepped closer, and Mercer stepped backward, his heels hitting the threshold. We have server logs, Dr. Mercer. We have your emails. We have 3 years of communications with hospital board members who trusted you. 2 FBI agents appeared in the doorway behind the colonel, and they wore the kind of expressions that had ended careers before breakfast. One of them held a folder thicker than a manuscript. Mercer's eyes darted between them, calculating vectors of escape that didn't exist. I was protecting the hospital. She wasn't authorized. His voice had become something other than speech, something fractured and desperate, the sound of someone watching his entire world compress into a single moment of terrible clarity. This is a mistake. I'm a physician. I have a reputation, I have colleagues, one of the agents stepped forward, holding out handcuffs that caught the light like silver teeth. Dr. Marcus Mercer, you're under arrest for unauthorized access to federal databases, attempted falsification of medical records, and conspiracy to obstruct a federal investigation. The cuffs clicked around Mercer's wrists with a sound like a lock closing on a door that would never open again. Nurses began gathering in the hallway outside the room, drawn by the movement and the uniforms and the sudden shift in the hospital's gravity. They were the same ones who had risen from the break room table the moment Megan sat down, the ones who had passed her in hallways without acknowledgement, the ones who had whispered about her behind closed hands. Now they watched in silence as the FBI agents walked Dr. Marcus Mercer past the nursing station where he had humiliated her, past the unit board where her write-up still hung like a monument to institutional cowardice, past the break room where she had stood alone and folded scrubs that still smelled like failure. His head was down. His white coat was wrinkled now, fabric somehow defeating itself. A medical student whispered to a resident in a voice meant to be private, "What's happening?" The resident, pale as someone who had just watched their own future rewrite itself, said she was a SEAL medic. He went after the wrong person. The sentence floated through the hallway like a prayer no one had known they needed. The elevator doors opened. The agents escorted Mercer inside. The doors closed with a pneumatic hiss, and he was gone, and it felt like the entire hospital exhaled simultaneously. Mrs. Hayes turned to Megan, tears streaming down her face in lines that looked like they had been waiting 6 months to fall. "You saved him. You saved my husband, and they tried to destroy you for it." Her voice cracked on the edges. Megan's response came quiet as a confession, "I did my job. That's all I've ever done." The Marine colonel approached and handed her a phone, secure line, encrypted, the kind of device that connected to offices that didn't officially exist. "Naval intelligence wants a debrief. Your cover held long enough. The mission is complete." Megan took the phone but didn't dial immediately. She looked at Commander Hayes, really looked at him, at the man who had carried her son's body when the blast came, who had held him breathing until the helicopter arrived, who had called in favor 6 months into recovery. 3 words. That's all it took to end an era. 72 hours later, FBI investigators had finished their work. The hospital's credentialing database had been secured, and the evidence against Dr. Marcus Mercer filled a federal warrant application that read like a catalogue of professional betrayal. Fraud. Falsification. Conspiracy. His medical license was suspended pending criminal charges. His colleagues, the ones who had backed him for a decade, suddenly couldn't recall ever having a conversation with him. His wife's lawyer filed for divorce on grounds that made no appearance in court documents but were understood clearly enough by the people who mattered. 6 months crawled forward like a scar healing in slow motion, and then someone spotted him in a strip mall classroom off a highway that nobody took anymore unless they had nowhere better to go. He was teaching CPR to bored community college students, $16 an hour, no benefits, wearing a wrinkled polo shirt instead of a white coat. His hands moved through chest compressions on a rubber mannequin that had forgotten how to feel. A former colleague saw him through the classroom window and looked away, the way you look away from something that used to be human but isn't anymore. Nobody hired him. No hospital would let him near a patient again. Power, once lost, leaves no forwarding address. Meanwhile, in Colorado Springs, Megan O'Brien returned to Seattle General on a Thursday morning in her navy dress whites, the ones that fit like a second skin that remembered who she actually was. The ribbons gleamed against her chest like a language that finally spoke the truth. The navy cross hung above her heart, visible now, no longer hidden inside jacket linings. She walked through the same ICU hallway where Dr. Mercer had humiliated her, where nurses had abandoned her, where she had folded scrubs alone and wondered if anyone would ever know that she had actually saved 3 lives in this hospital alone. The commander, a surgical patient who arrested on Mercer's protocol and lived because Megan adjusted the medication despite the risk, and a trauma admission who survived because she caught a medication error that would have been fatal. Nurses stood as she passed, something between respect and apology in their posture. The hospital administrator met her at the station, his hand extended, his face carrying the weight of knowing he had made the wrong choice when it mattered most. "Captain O'Brien, I want to apologize." "We should have." She shook his hand with a grip that felt like forgiveness wrapped in something harder. "You weren't given the information you needed to make the right choice. That's not your failure." She was there to formally debrief Commander Hayes before his transfer to Bethesda Naval Medical Center, and they sat in his room, the same room where he had whispered her call sign as if it were a prayer that could keep him alive. The folded flag rested on the windowsill behind them, sunlight catching the fabric, turning it golden. Commander Hayes was walking now, slowly, with a cane that he carried like a reminder of things survived, and when he extended his hand, it was steady. "My son told me about Fallujah. About the medic who kept him breathing until the helicopter arrived. I didn't know it was you." Megan's face softened, just slightly, the way a door opens just enough to let light through. "He was a good Marine. So was his teammate." She gestured to the flag on the windowsill, and Hayes nodded with the kind of understanding that requires no explanation. "You honored them both. You honored all of us." As Megan prepared to leave, moving with the same quiet competence that had defined her entire existence, a young nurse approached hesitantly, one of the ones who had left the break room that day, one of the ones who had watched from the hallway as the agents took Mercer away. Her name was Sarah, and her voice came out small. "Captain O'Brien, I wanted to apologize." "We should have." Megan stopped her with a single raised hand, not aggressive, just clear. "You followed the hierarchy. That's what hospitals teach you. But remember this, power is not a title. Power is the ability to help." She walked out through the main entrance, past the spot where the Pentagon officers first arrived on that 4th morning, past the ambulance bay where the morning light was turning everything the color of new beginnings, and into the Colorado Springs sunlight. Behind her, inside Seattle General, a legend was being born in real time. The quiet nurse who wasn't a nurse. The medic who had healed in the darkest places on Earth and had come home to heal in fluorescent light and institutional silence. The woman who had waited 6 months for the truth to surface, and when it did, it moved through the hospital like lightning, fast, illuminating everything at once, leaving nothing in shadow anymore. If you've ever been underestimated, ever been invisible, ever wondered if your value would ever be recognized, you understand Megan O'Brien. If you've ever stayed silent because speaking up felt like suicide, you understand what it costs to hold power in your hands and wait for permission to use it. Subscribe to this channel for stories of quiet warriors who change the world without making a sound. Like this video if you believe that true strength isn't about volume, it's about character. Comment below, what would you have done in Megan's position? And share this story with someone who needs to know that heroes walk among us, sometimes in scrubs, sometimes saving lives in the dark while the world sleeps. The truth has a way of surfacing. And when it does, everything changes.